In the bright corridors of a Delhi finance firm, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the illusion of normalcy, a dark game was already unfolding. One stitched together by desire, deception, and the deadly thirst for control. What began as a simple job application would soon evolve into a decade-long performance of manipulation so subtle, even the victim failed to see the dagger hiding behind her smile. But how far can one go to keep a position? What mask must one wear? And when does that mask become one's face? Faizal was 19 when she entered the firm, eyes filled with hope, desperation coiling beneath her polite demeanor. 1,000 resumes had gone ignored. She needed this job, not just for income, but for purpose. And when Neeraj Gupta, the charismatic owner of the company, extended his hand, she accepted not just a job offer, but unknowingly, a pact with fate. Within weeks, she had proven herself diligent, efficient, trustworthy, a model employee. But trust, as history reminds us, is merely the first ingredient in betrayal. Neeraj, a family man with 15 years of marriage behind him, began to notice Faizal. Her dedication seemed genuine, her concern personal. He mistook strategy for sincerity, never suspecting that each act of kindness was a calculated move in a long game. What began as passing glances turned into lingering conversations. Eventually, he began to think of her not as staff, but as a confidant. Then, as something more. Boundaries blurred. Late meetings turned to dinners. Professional concerns became personal ones. And one day, when the line between professional and personal finally dissolved, they crossed into an affair. But what Neeraj considered a fleeting escape, Faizal nurtured as a foothold. Every shared secret was stored like ammunition. Every weakness he showed became a string she could later pull. Their affair lasted not weeks or months, but 10 long years. A decade of deception, tangled between lies and longing. And throughout, Faizal never asked for commitment. She knew her power didn't lie in being his wife. It lay in being his secret. She kept him trapped, not with affection, but with quiet, consistent guilt. She was never naive. She was deliberate. And Neeraj, ensnared by his own desire, kept believing he was the one in control. But control is always an illusion, especially when others begin to enter the frame. 10 years later, when Faizal's mother insisted she finally marry, the structure she built began to tremble. Another man, Zubair, appeared, her fiancé, chosen not from love, but necessity. The moment he entered the narrative, the delicate balance that held Neeraj and Faizal's twisted bond collapsed. Faizal tried to end things. She thought a quiet conversation would suffice. She underestimated Neeraj's obsession. He refused. He insisted on speaking with her mother. He needed to explain. And on November 13th, 2020, he made a fateful decision. He stepped into her house, not realizing he was stepping into his grave. The conversation devolved into argument. Voices rose, emotions spiraled. Her mother, Shaheen, furious at his tone, grabbed a brick and struck him. One blow, just one, and the illusion of safety was shattered. Neeraj collapsed, blood pooled. Panic set in. Zubair, enraged, fetched a knife and began stabbing. It wasn't rage. It was fear masked in brutality. They didn't just kill Neeraj, they mutilated him. Not as punishment, but as strategy. The goal was erasure, to make him disappear so completely that even memory would falter. His remains were sliced, packed into a suitcase, and transported nearly 1,000 kilometers across the country to Gujarat. It was no longer a relationship, no longer a crime. It had become a performance of annihilation. As the train left the station and Zubair hurled the blood-soaked suitcase into darkness, a question remained behind, not in the minds of the killers, but in the void Neeraj left behind. His wife, Anchal, would awaken the next day to silence. A man with routines had vanished without a trace. But as we enter the next part, ask yourself, how long can a secret like this stay buried? The morning of November 14, 2020 was supposed to be filled with light, Diwali, the festival of life, warmth, and hope. Instead, the home of Neeraj Gupta was plunged into silence. Anchal waited for her husband to return. She called. No answer. She called again. The phone was off. Not unusual once, but never twice. Neeraj had never done this, not in 15 years of marriage. At first, she rationalized, maybe business took longer. Maybe he stayed with a friend. But when morning became afternoon and the silence thickened into dread, Anchal panicked. She called everyone, friends, family, employees. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. All except one person remained silent. Faizal. This silence struck Anchal harder than the absence itself. Faizal had always been oddly involved in their affairs. She would comment on their holidays, ask after their children, even recommend decorators for family functions. But now, she had vanished like mist, and Anchal, fueled by suspicion more than evidence, made her way to the police. The police didn't move immediately. Why would they? A missing adult man isn't rare in Delhi, but when Anchal named Faizal, the investigation stirred. They called her in. Faizal played her role well. She weaved stories, small lies, deflections. But truth has a way of leaking, especially under pressure. And when the police pressed harder, the cracks began to show. It wasn't long before the story spilled out, not from Faizal, but from the web of people around her. Her mother, her fiancé. Each was tethered to the same moment of violence, and when confronted separately, the story converged. Piece by piece, a picture formed of seduction, manipulation, murder, and mutilation. Back in Gujarat, the suitcase had already been found. Local police, discovering the dismembered body, had alerted other states. Yet it was only when Delhi police cross-referenced the details with Neeraj's disappearance that the dots began to connect. A corporate magnate reduced to anonymous body parts in a discarded bag. This was no ordinary crime. When the truth reached Anchal, the grief was overwhelming, yes, but more than grief, it was betrayal. Not just of a wife by her husband, but of a woman by another who had pretended for years to be part of the family. And it raised questions that echoed through corridors of law and public opinion alike. Was this a crime of passion or premeditated destruction? Faizal, Zubair, and Shaheen were arrested. The media swarmed. Headlines screamed. But the real horror wasn't in the violence. It was in the realization that no one around Neeraj, not even his closest, had seen it coming. And perhaps worse, that they never would have known if a single woman hadn't decided that Faizal's silence spoke louder than her words. Yet something still lingered beneath. What had kept Faizal tied to Neeraj for 10 years, only to let go so violently? And why had she never left earlier if she had always known the relationship was doomed? These questions remained unanswered, drawing us deeper still into the hollow space between love, need, and power. It is easy to vilify murderers. Easier still to label victims as martyrs. But rarely does a story offer such twisted symmetry, where both killer and killed are architects of the same collapsing bridge. Faizal wasn't innocent. Neeraj wasn't blameless. They were both builders of a house made from lies. And when the storm came, it was their own creation that crushed them. Years before the murder, Neeraj had choices: to end the affair, to protect his family, but he chose ego. Faizal, too, had options. She could have walked away. She could have confessed, but she clung to control until control became destruction. Zubair, a pawn in a play he never wrote, but chose to act in, and Shaheen, an enabler turned executioner. As the court trial dragged on, months turning to years, public opinion shifted. Faizal became a symbol of cunning, of victimhood, of consequence. But none of these masks were true. She was merely human, like all involved. And that was the most terrifying part. The law may eventually provide judgment. But what of the deeper truth? This case wasn't born from madness. It was born from decisions. From each moment, someone chose to lie instead of speak, manipulate instead of resolve. And when enough of those moments collect, the result is not chaos. It is inevitability. The tale of Neeraj Gupta is not just one of death, but of a slow, deliberate suicide of character, on all sides. A story where love was currency, trust was leverage, and murder was merely the final transaction. And like every such tale, it leaves behind not just a corpse, but a mirror, one held up to all who believe they control their secrets. So now, the myths have been stripped, the deception laid bare, the guilty caught, the story closed. Or is it? What if Faizal never meant for Neeraj to die? What if it was never about love or hate, but about something else entirely, something still hidden, something you missed? What do you think really happened behind closed doors?